Inspire Instructor Podcast, where the learning never stops. Welcome, you wonderful people, to today's episode of Inspire Instructor Training Podcast. Today we have a wonderful guest lined up. Let's Instruct's Andrew Love. Andrew has a wealth of experience and he shares that knowledge with us today. We discuss road safety, and our competency for today was the teaching style suited to the pupil's learning style and current ability. Don't forget to hang around till the end for Andrew's top tip. I just want to take a moment to talk to you about Inspire Instructor Training's workshops. We've called the workshops We're Only Human. Now this is because we want to dig into the human side of training learners, remembering that we have someone coming to learn with us that with at least 17 years of life experiences, and we discuss how we handle those experiences in relation to helping them become a safe driver on the road. So if you're interested in the workshop, please head over to inspireinstructortraining.com for more details. So I would like to welcome today from Let's Instruct Academy Partnership. I'll let you explain it a little bit more. So a well-renowned and experienced trainer, been in the industry for I don't know how long, but seems like forever.
20 years.
20 years.
20 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, welcome Andrew Love, and yeah. So
January 2004.
2004. Not much before, actually. I was 2006. So
Yeah.
a couple of years on me. Yeah. I always remember because of the year my daughter was born. So it's like 17
Oh,
years.
right. Yeah.
And then I taught her to drive this last month, end of last year. So it's got, I always kind of joke that effectively it was 17 years worth of training ready to teach her to drive.
Well, I taught both my wife and my daughter to drive, and I have to say it was the most wonderful experience you could ever have, helping them acquire new skills. Yeah, and of course, back in those days, we had to do briefings exactly. Yeah, so what I did, because I just let her try stuff out, which is linked to the topic that we're going to do today. But I just thought we'd not done the emergency stop. So I thought I'm going to do a proper briefing that would, in the old system, that would get me a grade 6. And so I got her to talk about it. I went through the whole of the briefing, asked her a few questions. She said, "Dad, can we get on board now?" And this links really nicely to was the teaching style suited to pupils' learning style and current ability.
Yeah,
And
no, absolutely. And in
yeah,
a way, that entire interaction kind of shows why it was important to change the way we did it as instructors. Actually, this wasn't going to be my question, and we'll get onto that in a minute. But I'm intrigued this because of the experience that I had teaching my daughter. Did you, when you were teaching your wife and daughter, teach them in any like different to maybe how you were teaching your other learners? In any way, like I know from my experience teaching my daughter, there was I feel like I do this with all my learners, but there was just this added little bonus of like, it's my daughter, I need her to be safe on the road. And you want all your pupils to be safe on the road, but I think there was an element of that little bit extra, like I really, really, really want her to be safe on the road. Did you have any sort of differences there?
So the difference was I'm a great believer in whatever we do that you've got to just keep practicing. Yeah, it's what I call bum in seat time. You've got to just keep driving and driving and driving. And so with both my wife and my daughter, if we wanted some milk, we drove to the shop. If we didn't want some milk, we drove to the shop, bought the milk, brought it back home, and then drove back again so we could get a refund on the milk. It was just getting them drive as much as we possibly can. And it was a bit different because they were exposed to the driving for so much longer. and it didn't cost them anything, so it didn't matter. Um, they were just learning all of the time. So I didn't exactly give them a specific number of lessons or things like that. But what we did do um, was work very much on the basis of, well, how did that feel? Yeah. What sort of what sort of things? What do you think you could do differently? Yeah. Because I was determined that we would not fall out while we were doing it. And it actually, when my wife when I first taught my wife, it was about 18 months in, and she just picked things up really quickly. You know, in spite of me being her instructor, she was brilliant. Yeah. And I think sometimes as trainers, we forget that people can learn themselves, learn by trying, learn by playing. Yeah. One of the questions I often ask is, um, how did the inventor of the car teach them to drive themselves to drive? Because they never had driving instructors. Yeah. And I use that philosophy really, try
Yeah.
and help them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree, and interesting with my daughter, I had a similar experience with the real life experiences were important, and so it was she went to go and view a university, and I was like, well, you're definitely doing
Yeah.
that drive, and so
Yeah.
she drove us a couple of hours down the motorway, and
Yeah.
or we went to watch some fireworks in like a 40 minutes away in a city, and she drove at night. It was busy because everyone else was going to see the fireworks through the
Yeah.
city. I'm like, this is what we need to be doing with our learners. Obviously, that's quite hard to sort of kind of recreate with a learner, like a Friday evening at a fireworks. But you can do similar stuff with learners,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. I'm just picking that up because I taught a lovely lady last year, and her boyfriend was in a barracks near Melton Mowbray, and she was finding it a bit difficult at times. But she said, because we were talking about where he was, and she said, well, that's only about 40 minutes away, and she said, can we drive there? I said, of course we can. We can't do it this week, but we can do it next week. So you need to go and find the route. Yeah. So you go and tell me which route is. We've got the sat nav, so we can do it on the sat nav as well. But you tell me what the route is. Yeah. So we did it um the following week, and after that, all of a sudden, she got a lot better because she it was something for a little goal that she wanted. Yeah. And then so much so, about 3 months later, about 6 weeks before a test, she said, it's my grandma's birthday today. Can I drive and see her? Yeah, of course you can. Let's go. And she knocked on the door, and her grandma said, what are you doing? How did you get here? She said, I drove here. Yeah.
Yeah,
If
no,
we can allow them the flexibility to learn the way that they want to and make it personal to them, we'll be a lot more successful at what we're doing.
yeah, absolutely, and I 100% agree, and you can find those moments in nearly every pupil you've got of
Mm.
those journeys, and it
Mm.
it's also like it's not just the fact that they learn in that time. It also means that when that pupil that you've got passes her test, she's now no longer worried about those two journeys that maybe were quite big achievements for her. If you've just taught her around where the test center is, great, she passes the driving test. But then her biggest now concern is like, I've got to drive 40 minutes to go and see my boyfriend, or got to drive however long
Yeah,
to go and see my
yeah.
my gran, and it becomes this big deal where she's done it with you. It's just like, well, I've done it before. I'm fine. I can do this. And so it takes away that sort of kind of fear post test. This
Yeah.
kind of links me into my question that I was going to ask you, and our sort of kind of discussion point that I want to go through before we move on to the competency. I've seen you at a couple of like road safety events in the last and I say in the last year, but I mean you've been going to them for years. And I saw you post about one recently that you went to. So you're quite big on sort of kind of going to these sort of kind of road safety events that not necessarily many instructors go to. It tends to be sort of kind of fire brigade and that sort of kind of sector that attends these things. So my question is for you is what maybe could instructors or the industry be doing more to interact with road safety or improve road safety like on the road?
The reason that I go to a lot of these events, and a lot of them are road safety GB events, and the VR event we met at, the virtual reality event that we met at, we are strategically very important in road safety. There are very few road safety professionals that get as much time with as we do with clients. Yeah. And that doesn't matter whether you're teaching learners, teaching, working with full license holders, training ADIs. Okay, we're in the business of road safety. So if we don't listen to these people, if we don't find out what they're doing, how can we relate the information that we're teaching to what's happening in the real world? Yeah. So the VR conference, that was my second year that I was at the VR conference. And VR, virtual reality, is likely to become more widely used in driver training, particularly as the cost of the equipment and everything um, uh, 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 gets cheaper. People are going to want to try things to get their learning experience, improve their learning experience, but also get through um, uh, in a cheaper way, because costs are very are high, and so they should be. But if we don't understand what products are available, how can we best serve our clients? Yeah. And the Road Safety GB conference, which is a great conference every year, it is a bit expensive, but it gets me in front of those academics. It gets me in front of the people that are trying the stuff out. Yeah. So last year when I was at the Road Safety GB conference, I was sitting next to Liz Box. Yeah. And you know, when Leanne Parkinson, the DVSA policy manager. Yeah. So you're mixing with those people, you're getting to understand exactly what's going on. And as an example of this, we talk about the highway code, the hierarchy to the highway code. Now, I'm a bit older than you, Phil, and I was never taught to knock a pedestrian over when I learned to drive. Apparently it was a no-no. Yeah.
Frowned upon.
So, yeah. So why has the hierarchy changed in the highway code? Well, actually, there's more emphasis on it. But if we think about where did this start? So about 10 or 15 years ago, the government wanted to get people more active. And at the Road Safety GB conference, I can't remember if it was year one or year two, we had people from the NHS coming to talk about getting people more active. Yeah. So now, so they had a big initiative. They put lots of money in getting cycleways, bridle paths, more cycle paths. Yeah, encouraging people to walk to school and things like that. But when they did the research, one of the things that they found was that people didn't want to cycle, they didn't want to walk, they didn't want to ride their horse because they were concerned that car drivers, the lorry drivers, the vehicle drivers didn't really take them into account. So if you think about that, the research was done by the academics, yeah, to get us more active. They put some pilots in, they developed the systems, and then what happened? Obviously they review it and they look at the things that were stopping the interventions working. Now, if you think about the hierarchical changes from there, the hierarchy, the changes to the highway code, you now start to understand, you have a better understanding of why they've come about. That's why it's important to engage with the wider road safety fraternity. Does that make sense?
It really does. And it's definitely something that I'm starting to see it bubble a little bit more within the industry. It should be at the forefront. But I sort of get why it isn't, because we're never trained to do that sort of kind of stuff. It's not talked about. And like you said, quite often it's expensive. So I can see that sort of kind of thing. But maybe it is a case of certain people within the industry doing that, and then it filters down and trickles down. The Terry Cook is starting to do quite a lot around this, certainly in this next season of his podcast. So I think that for anybody sort of kind of listening, would be quite an interesting. He's hoping to try and be that bridge, like between that industry, between the industry, and let it filter through. So I think, yeah, go and listen to Terry, and filter through. But I definitely. Terry actually asked the question on his Facebook the other day about he was going off to meet some people from the wider world of road safety, and how they could, like, how could driving instructors be more involved in that, or how do we see ourselves being more involved in that? And I think you sort of kind of nailed it on the head, and it was my response to him actually as well, which was, what other sort of kind of road safety professionals get the opportunity to spend that long with a driver? Like there's no there's no, like, the fire brigade go and do their presentations, and the police go and do their presentations, and they get maybe 2 hours at tops with 100 people, rather than us having 40-50 hours with one person. And so we have the ability to really influence road safety. The way I described it is, we're the front line of road safety.
Yeah.
Like, if we do our jobs properly, they don't need to do their jobs because we prevented it. We're the prevention.
But it's very definitely, it's very definitely, but it's not just learners. So next week, I'm delivering a driver assessors course. So, so I'm working with somebody to become a driver assessor. We're going to look at their driving skills to start off with, and then we're going to look at their assessing skills. So this, and I've got a 2-day session with this person. So this here is now building. We're starting to reach out all of a sudden, and a lot of people see driving instructors working with learners. There's a lot of opportunities to work with full license holders, yeah, and get their buy-in, yeah. So I was working with a project director at a very large company a couple of months ago, about 6 months ago, and we started talking about phones and having the discussions about phones. Now, I was just leading the conversation, and at no point did I say to him, you can't use the phone. But he said, I've got to reduce the amount of phone time I'm on the phone. Bang for bucks. Yeah. And it goes back to this bit here. Was the teaching style suited to the pupil's learning style and current ability? So there, where I was talking with that gentleman, I was asking him about his day. I was asking him about what's happening, what usually happens. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, because it was worked that way, we then we then were able to come up with a solution that was bespoke to him.
So yeah, we're going to talk about our competency for this week then. So our competency this week is, was the teaching style suited to the pupil's learning style and current ability? So yeah, Andrew, do you want to give us your opinion on that?
Yeah, so here with any of these competencies, you've got to look at the important words and you've got to break them down because there's more than one meaning to this. So the first thing is, what's the teaching style? Okay, so we've got to think about teaching styles. The next one was suited to the pupil's learning style. Okay, so we've got to think about their learning style. And finally, the current ability. Yeah. So let's think about teaching style first of all. Okay, so we all teach in a particular way, and we're all used to working in a particular way. And what we have to recognize is that sometimes pupils don't learn in the way that we do. Yeah. So when I was at school, um, many years ago, 59, I know I don't look it, don't laugh that much. 59, it was very much the teacher told you what they were going to learn. Yeah. Um, and they did it in a particular way that suited them. Yeah. Now, I was dyslexic at school and I still am dyslexic, but they didn't diagnose with my dyslexia. Um, and I didn't know until I did a foundation degree in education. But so there, um, uh, they weren't taking what I did or what my teaching, my learning style, okay, into account. Um, at that time, I was always like, why is it, or why is it me? Why do I always have to work really hard to learn stuff? Whereas my brother doesn't. He just learns it dead easy. Yeah. Um, and what I had to do to ensure that I was learning properly was break things down into teeny tiny pieces. Yeah. Of course, they didn't really understand that back in those days. Yeah. About how to do it. And I always had to do it. So experiential learning. Yeah. Always had to give it a go. And then I'd work it out from there. Yeah. But if so, what I have to be very careful of is because I what I have to be careful of is I don't force that onto my onto my customers. And although saying that I'm a kinesthetic learner, a doer, when I did my Cert Ed, okay, I actually learned that sometimes I have to read stuff and I have to read it 3 or 4 times. And then I have to highlight. So some of the notes I've made here, I highlight in pen. Yeah. So so my learning style changed depending on what I was doing. And I also like watching videos. So I'm good at I do at DIY. If my wife was listening, she would definitely say I'm not good at it. But I use YouTube videos. And when I do anything, with our courses and stuff like that, I watch YouTube videos, get to that certain point, and so my learning style changes for what I'm doing. Yeah. So I have to be very careful that I don't teach one particular way and explore it with people. So I've talked really the teaching style, the pupil styles. Now, I want to just talk about the current ability. So the current ability, what does that actually mean? So it's on the day. So for example, I was working with somebody a few weeks ago, and this particular person, they're coming up to test really great. they're doing really, really well. Then then this week they got in the car and their ability,
Oh,
something had changed. So here I had to find out what the barrier to the learning was, because at that current moment in time, their current ability wasn't the same as it was previously. So, and it turns out that the person had um, uh, uh, some quite bad news, okay, and they needed to um, have some treatment, and that was what was playing on their mind. So this is not just about understanding the way people learn. The current ability can be affected by what's going on in their life at this moment in time.
absolutely. And the examiners, if we obviously that you're talking like day-to-day life lessons there, and that absolutely affects your day-to-day lessons. It's interesting here with we talk about part three and standards check though, that I think the examiners have a bit of an advantage on this one with that current ability thing, because they have no preconceptions of the pupil's current ability. So they're literally seeing their current ability. Whereas an
Mm.
instructor might be sort of a bit like, oh, wait a minute, you don't normally do this, and then maybe brush over something because they don't
Yeah,
normally do it. And actually, you need to be teaching the pupil that is there on the day in that moment, and so. Yeah, absolutely. I think it can it gets
yeah.
you see that on Facebook and stuff. We go, well, how does the examiner know my pupil? Like that's what I know my pupil, but actually in that moment, I think the examiner knows your current pupil in a way better.
Actually, that's a really great way of putting it. The current pupil. I'm going to steal that one. I'm going to steal. So what's actually happening at the time, and this is all about task demand. Yeah, and this is why you see it in the back of the test sometimes. And I didn't teach you that. I didn't teach you to pull out like that. And the examiner looks at you. I didn't teach it honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But this is all about what's going on at the current time. Yeah, and I dare say most of us have been instructors for more than 5 or 6 years. Will notice in probably when the time of mocks or A levels are going, all of a sudden they start doing stuff. Well, what's happened? What's going on? And that's because something else is happening at that time, and that changes their current ability. This is we were talking about mixing with road safety professionals. This is a perfect time to talk to people about, okay, what's going on then? Okay, so how are you feeling? Yeah. So let's think about this. Once you pass your test, when else might you be feeling this anxious, this stressed, or uh, concerned about what's about to happen? Yeah. And it could be job interviews, all sorts of things. Yeah. And you can start helping them develop strategies to deal with this. And they're all going to have their own strategy. Yeah, they're going to be very similar, to be honest, but we can help them build their own strategy, um, and that will help them. As in there, it talks about uh, um, offering a range of options for teaching. Yeah, so and discussion is part of them, demonstration. Yeah, those sort of things.
Yeah, it's interesting actually in that section there where it says about the range of options, because it says um, this might be demonstrated over a short, because obviously the standards check in the part three is a short section of
Yeah,
learning, and it sort of implies that you can only demonstrate that by doing it. You would only do that because it's a short session. But actually, going back to what you were saying about how you learn different things in different ways, and I actually interestingly we did a Zoom on this last night, and we were talking about this, and it's it should always be the case that we're offering different options, not just on a standards check and a part three session, because like you were saying earlier, the learners like you were saying, you learn different things in different ways, and the same with learners. So I was the same when you were saying that. It's like if I wanted to learn how to make changes on my website, I wouldn't read an article, I'd watch a video. Um,
Mm,
but if I wanted to dig into, I don't know, maybe coaching skills or something like that, I'd probably listen to a podcast because that's the
mm.
way I like to sort of kind of take that in. And yeah, it's you learn different things in different ways, and I think that applies to driving. So a pupil who, and this is why I don't necessarily love the whole you can send out a learning style questionnaire to someone to learn their learning styles because it just pigeonholes them in a way into like one
Yeah,
type of learning style. And I think a
yeah,
learner might learn roundabouts in a different way to how they would want to learn reversing. Like reversing, quite often people want to give it a
yeah,
go or maybe watch a video.
yeah.
And
Mm.
whereas maybe roundabouts, they want a bit more information first. It just like it depends on, and
Yeah.
I'm obviously there could be many options here, but I do think there's an element there of just because your pupil has shown you one learning style one week doesn't
Mm.
mean that next week when you're learning something else or even the same thing, they might want to try a different learning style and see what suits them on that day.
Yeah. Well, learning styles are all about what's happening at the time. So, and lots of people are multi-modular.
Hmm.
So they will be kinesthetic. They will be uh, 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 reader writers. Yeah, they will sometimes want to be audible. They just want to listen, or visual learners. Yeah. Now we all do that in lots of different in lots of different times. So one of the things is Gardner's multiple learning styles. Have a look at that because it goes to it explores a lot more of the way we learn. And a classic example with this was I was teaching a young lady um, about 10 or 12 years ago now, and she could play no end of instruments, and she'd learnt music dead easy. Um, and but she was struggling with the car. So I just said, you know, how do you learn to play? If you were to learn to play a new instrument tomorrow, what would you do? And so she talked it through. And um, I said, well, why don't you treat the car as a musical instrument? She got it because I was speaking her language. Yeah. The learner is an expert in the way that they do things. Yeah. It's the same as if you're working with people with additional needs, ADHD or on the spectrum. They understand they're an expert in their condition. So don't you tell them what what they should be doing with their condition. Use use what they know, and you're an expert in understanding the rules of the road, the way we do things, etiquette of driving, and things like that. So use them to marry it together. And I just think that's really important. And one of the things here it says in the competency, it's impossible to force learning on a pupil. And this was when I was looking at learning styles. Uh, it was you can only ever facilitate a learner. You can never teach them directly. Yeah. And I think this is really important for everybody to remember. You can create an environment for learning, but what you can't do is force that learning on them.
Yeah, and it has to be the right environment for that
Yeah.
pupil, like we've
Mm.
talked. The
Yeah.
just going back to you're talking about the ADHD and autism spectrum. It I quite often get asked like how do I deal with someone with these conditions or special educational needs, and My first answer is the same way you should be dealing with all of your pupils, because
Yeah.
I remember listening to it on and I've talked about this before on the podcast. There's a another podcast called Sen Podcast, and it's if
Oh,
you're
yeah, yeah.
if you're dealing with lots of pupils with special educational needs, it's a great podcast to listen to because you'll get lots of like
Is
tips.
that Julia? Is that Julia?
No, no, it's no, he's not they're not instructor related. I can't remember the guy who runs it. Terry had him on one of his Cook had him on one of his webinars, and that's what kind of led me to it. But yeah, Sam podcast is a really good one to listen to. But the episode I was listening to, they had they were talking about education like in schools and how they have Senko, like Sen
Yeah.
coordinators at
Yeah.
schools, and they were talking about how in that scenario, if you have a pupil at the with special education needs, you put all these special ways in to sort of kind of help them learn and let them express their learning in their way and stuff like that. And he was saying, why didn't they just do that for everyone? Like, and that's kind of like how it should be. Like, if I
Mm.
get someone who has ADHD, autism in my car, that I don't do anything different, because the thing I would do with every pupil I had was find out what works for them, and the issue can be whether it's special educational needs or not, that you don't want to label them with this is how you're going to learn, because
Mm.
they learn everything in their own way. And if you say, well, a person with all this will work for a person with autism, like that everyone's individual, and so you have to kind of dig into that. How does that person learn? And like you said earlier, that they are an expert in them, and that's all you get whenever you get into the car, that they are the expert in the car. I get that we have the road knowledge, but
Mm.
they're the ones that will give you the answers to these questions, and not, so you can't like put your, and I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that instructors make is we're creatures of habit, so we want to teach,
Mm.
like you teach one way and then you go,
Yeah.
oh, that worked for my last pupil, so it'll probably work here, and that sort of thing. And like you said right at the start, like you have your so with the dyslexia and stuff, you prefer to like watch a video and stuff, and it's
Mm.
be careful to not assume that that's just the best way because it works for you. It just happens to
Yeah.
be the best way for you. And so yeah, definitely having these conversations is like right from the start, like how are we going to learn this? It is so crucial
Yeah.
with the pupils.
One, if when people see me speak, they'll often hear me say, "People learn in spite of me being their trainer."
Yeah.
Yeah, because they will learn, and creating the right environment for them to think about what they're doing is very important. And this is where coaching comes in, but you don't always have to coach. Yeah. Um, Simple little questions like, uh, talk to me about your speed choice. Yeah. So what we're doing now is getting the information out of them for why they've made that choice. Now, as a trainer, that is really important for me to understand. Have they considered that choice? Have they considered that speed? Or was it just a lucky guess? Because if they've considered it, I want to know exactly what they've done. And this was an example um, a number of years ago, probably about 15 years ago now. A young lady, I work in Kettering and Northamptonshire, and she came down from Sheffield to have driving lessons with me. And we were driving along the road to the test centre, Doddington Road, and she said to me, "Look at all these curbs and potholes," because it was an industrial estate. And she said, "I'm going to slow down." Okay, so tell me about why. And she said, "Would I be failed on the test for that?" Well, if you're not expressing a reason, then how does the examiner know? Anyway, she did this on the test, and the examiner came running over to me, running over and said, "Andrew, Andrew, if she hadn't have talked to me about the reason she was traveling at that speed, she would have had an error, but I couldn't argue with the reason. Yeah. So if we can draw that stuff out, and often it's about asking the right question. Yeah. Listening for the answer. And then asking a follow-up question based on the answer, listening for the answer again, and then a third question. So I use a 3-question rule, because if they're not going to get it by 3, you need to tell them. Yeah. And draw it out with them. Get that. So it's not necessarily so I understand what they mean. They need to understand what they mean. Yeah. Because it's them that has got to make that driving choice based on their understanding of what's happening at the time.
Yeah, I quite like that little 3-question rule. I think I've talked to PDIs about that. Maybe not. I've not called it a rule, but I like the idea of you have to ask these 3 questions. I think I've challenged people to do that before, actually. Interestingly, I think then would you then start that again? So if what I mean by that is, so say you've asked your 3 questions to try and get the
Yeah.
information out of people, then you've had to give the information. I think I would then start again with 3 more questions. So based on what information I've just given you, what's your analysis of that? Or give me some
Yeah.
advantages and disadvantages of that. So you start again, like getting them to process the
Yeah.
information you've just given them.
So there, it depends on the situation, of course. But what we probably be wanting to do is re-deliver whatever they've done. So, for example, if they were too fast a roundabout, and we determine that, and then because always traditionally it's been what's the consequences, what's the analyze it, what the consequences are. But when they've corrected it, they never mention benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what we need to do is because it's simple behavioral change techniques, we need to put the benefits in, so that changes the way that they changes the way that they do things, because we think about the consequences first, and then we put the benefits of modifying their behavior.
Yeah, and I think there's
Yeah.
also an element there of if you're giving someone some information, it's difficult for them to recall that. Whereas if you get them to analyze what you have just given them and
Mm.
dissect it and come up with pros and cons, it's going to stick because they've
Yeah.
thought through it, and so it's not a case of it. And I talked about this recently, but on the podcast, but it's just it's not a case of them having to remember what you've said, and so you're not going to have that I told you that last week sort of kind of thing, because it will have stuck. I think this also kind of links to one of the positives on this competency positives the examiners are looking for, which is linking theory to practice. And I think that
Yeah.
finding that balance on a session is really important, that we're not necessarily, not that you shouldn't be sat at the side of the road, because I think that's where these great conversations happen. But we need to remember it's a practical skill, and so therefore at some point we need to go and put it out on the road and put it into practice. Yeah. And you were saying that with like you've then got to go and do it again, and I think I see that when I'm sat in the car, the conversation will happen, and then we'll just drive off and move on. And I'm like, no, you need to go and do that again, and that's where
Yeah.
learning takes place, when you experience it, and so you've got to go and put that experience in again. Yeah.
Yeah. Experiential learning.
Yeah.
Kolb, if anybody wants to look at that, KOLB. Kolb has got a great look up there. You can see all the diagrams, and you can see the understanding of that. Experiential learning is another cycle as well. Those sort of things that what stands out for me is that everybody says you learn to drive when you've passed your test. So that's not quite true, because when you're learning to drive, you're sowing the seeds of behavior. Yeah. And you're starting to get people to think about what on earth they are doing. Yeah. And how are they going to do that safely? And what happens after they've passed the test, their risk starts to reduce with the more experience that they get. So if because of their experience, their risk is being reduced, and it does mean that they are learning as they're driving and they're learning independently. But what we have to do as road safety professionals is give them a solid foundation for that learning to take place. And that's one of the reasons why we should be encouraging them to think what went well, what didn't go so well, what are we going to do differently? The greatest question they can ever ask is, how did that feel? Yeah, get them to think about how that felt. So we're encouraging them to take ownership, and that's one of the indicators of competence, encouraging and helping the people to take ownership of learning, the learning process, because what's happening here is if we don't, when that young driver approaches that country road at midnight and the bend too fast, they won't recognize what it feels like. So they'll just keep doing it again. But if they recognize it feels uncomfortable, then they can do something about it.
Yeah, I
Because
think
we're building those self-assessment skills in.
that phrase where you mentioned there of you learn to drive after you pass your test. It's one of those ones that it sort of kind of gets my beef, because partly I think, what the hell are you paying me for,
Yeah.
if you're going to learn after. But like you just said, I think I actually think possibly the most important skill you can teach a pupil is that ability to self-analyze, because you talked about
Mm,
gain experience as you get as and that's how we learn. But actually, we only learn from experience if we analyze it. And so, how many drivers
mm,
do you see out there that have years of experience that are potentially worse than when they were
mm.
learning to drive? Because what they have done is that they've gained experience but haven't learned from those experiences, or in a way, sometimes have learned to drive worse from those experiences because nothing bad happened that time, and then they
So,
learn from that and
yeah.
go and they keep repeating it. So it's
So
important that we sort
this
of
is really important, because in the driver awareness schemes, um, you often get people who have been speeding on a road. They've been doing 38, 39 on the same road for years and years and years, and nothing happens. Yeah. So what they're doing, that's positive reinforcement. I can do this because I've been safe previously. Yeah. But what they don't understand, or what they can't see, are they safe because of their skill, or are they safe because others have recognized the dangers of what's gone on or what's happening and have taken evasive action? So if they don't recognize that somebody's taken as evasive action, then all of a sudden, okay, they think that's their skill that's achieved that, and that isn't correct.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we need to analyze. Yeah.
I tried to have that conversation with my friend this week, because he was giving me a lift somewhere and was not the most pleasurable drives, and I think that was exactly his issue, that he was driving around thinking he was the bee's knees, put in
Yeah.
like lots of risky situations, high speeds, um, and what he isn't realizing is that exactly that. And I had that conversation with him, is that
Mm.
other people are avoiding you, and that's why what you're doing is what
Yeah.
that's why you're getting
Yeah.
away with it. And all it takes is one person
Yeah.
to not have avoided you, and you're going to be in a mess.
Yeah. So, and one of the ways that I work with people about like this. So, if so often when it's a right corner cut, okay, I'll talk to them about, okay, so do you know what happened there? Yeah. Have you ever been in a car when uh, whether you've been driving or being driven, and somebody does a corner cut and you're going the other way? Oh yeah. How did it make that driver feel? What did they do? They get cross, etc., etc. They get angry. Okay. Um, would you want so if you were driving that car that did the corner cut, would you want others to feel that way about you? Yeah. So what we're doing, we're now putting them in the third party. So we ask, well, how did that make the driver feel? How did that make you feel? Cross, angry, frustrated. Okay. So let's think about that now. You're back in the car that's cut the corner. Somebody's coming towards you. Would you want them to feel that way about you as you felt about that driver? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah. So we're now putting them into the third party.
Yeah. Just coming back to the competency here, there's one that I wanted to just discuss here on the things of like not to do. Concentrate on delivering teaching tools rather than looking for learning outcomes. And I think this sometimes can come up in scaling is quite a good example of this actually, where
Yeah.
a BDI has maybe heard that scaling might be a good thing to do, and it will show some sort of show that I can do this thing, and then they go and do it and maybe not quite get it right. But the point is they're doing scaling because they think they should do scaling rather than scaling because on this particular moment the scaling makes sense to have a conversation with the pupil. So it's not always like scaling isn't always a good thing. Yeah, and yet sometimes it's a brilliant thing, but it's about the point. The point is you're sat there with the learner thinking, how can I get this conversation going? How can I get learning out of this conversation? And you think, oh, scaling would work for this. I'm going to try and have a conversation around using scaling, or a mind map might work for this.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that you're not going, oh, I've been on a course about mind maps, therefore I'm going to do a mind map regardless of the scenario. And I think that's something to be careful with when you're particularly PDIs, I think, where you're going into this sort of having like just a little bit of knowledge about each thing and just thinking I need to put this into my part three on my standards check.
So I think sometimes it's the scale that we use.
Mm-hmm.
So common scaling is on a scale of 1 to 10. Brilliant. Okay. But is that personal? And is that personal to the receiver? Yeah. So it might be, let's compare that with what we did 20 minutes ago. Where are you now compared with what we were 20? That's a scale.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It might be. Yeah. Do you follow football?
Yeah, I do. Yep.
Yeah.
What's I'm an
team?
Arsenal fan.
Oh, flipping it. I'm a Spurs fan.
Oh
So
no,
it
ruin the
might be a bit
podcast.
different. Yeah. So it might be a bit difficult to answer this question. What's the best game that Arsenal have played in the last season? What's their best game? Who was it against?
To be honest, maybe
Spurs.
last week against Liverpool was probably
Yeah.
a season change.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was the reason that was a great game?
So it's interesting because it was it was probably less about the football and more about the event in the season. It was we needed the win, if that makes sense. Like you lose that game and the season's over. To put the importance on that.
So it was important for the season. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's think about the worst game. This should be fairly easy to work out what your worst game was. Because loads of them, don't you?
I can't remember who's beaten us this year, to be honest.
Let's say against Spurs. Let's say it was against Spurs.
Yes, unlikely, but okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we did beat you at some stage.
Yeah.
So we find out what the worst game was. So what was a mediocre game? What was one where you weren't very good or you weren't very bad or you just mediocre game?
Yeah, again, I can't recall all the games, but I get what you
So
mean. Like a
let's
score,
think,
like a 1-1 draw
yeah,
sort of kind of thing. Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah,
let's say Brentford or something
yeah,
like that. Yeah. So now we've just created a scale, haven't we?
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Whose scale is that?
yeah. There's the pupils in it. Yeah, no, I like it. It's good.
Yeah. So now all of a sudden, we've now got a scale, and that person understands that scale. I can't understand why you even support Arsenal myself, but it's it's not my scale, but it gives you a baseline to work to. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of stuff about scaling that people don't fully understand. And the scale that we've got and we should be using is the one in the ADI one, which is the reflective log. What went well? What didn't go so well? What are you going to do differently? That's the scale.
Hmm.
Yeah. But what tends to happen is we try and make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me,
Mm.
and you're linking it to it with this when you with those questions, scaling. And I didn't necessarily want this to become a scaling podcast, but let's go with it. I think for me, scaling is not about the number or the football team or the heat or the temperature or the color or whatever you use. It's a way to facilitate the conversation. And so I think sometimes those questions you were asking about what went well and stuff like that, the sometimes learners struggle with that. Whereas if you can give them something to anchor their feelings to, so if they've said a 4, whatever that means, um, it it allows them to anchor their feelings to the 4. So what does 4 mean to you? And that's the key, I think, is why how I would use scaling in that scenario. And I think that's where people get marked down for this competency, because I would use scaling to facilitate the conversation, whereas they're maybe using scaling as literally the number is important and matters, and it doesn't
Yeah.
add learning to the conversation. And that's where you're going, that's where you would get marked down for saying using a tool for the sake of using the tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say, right, I have to say that I've heard examiners say they were no way an 8. You've missed the
Yeah.
point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
And I remember doing so because I used to do some business coaching with young enterprise at my daughter's school, and we were talking about the show that they just put on, and I said, well, "What's the score?" And they said 6, and the teacher said, "No, it's not. It's not 6. It's more than that." Just shut up. That's not important. Let's let's find out what the good stuff is, and let's find out what you think you can improve. And um this is about how we uh uh meet those needs with the pupil. Yeah. And their learning styles, and how do we do that? But of course, we can't just take the competency in in isolation, because all of this stuff goes back, doesn't it? So this links to, were they encouraged to take responsibility for their learning? Yeah, it talks about, and so it also could link back to the goals and needs. So discovering um, how they learn could influence how we teach them the error, or work with them to solve the error or the misunderstanding, which again goes, and it's a it's a holistic thing. It's not just
Yeah.
one.
I don't think I've recorded one of these podcasts yet where
Mm.
the person I'm talking to hasn't said it links to one of the other the other
Yeah,
competencies, because every competency links to some of the other competencies, and they all
that's it.
interlink
Yeah,
together. And actually, in a way, when I do my training, I don't necessarily over go over the competencies. Like I know I'm doing a podcast about them, but
Yeah.
because I think actually if you just learn how to deliver good lessons and have good conversations, you
Yeah.
cover these competencies without even knowing them. I
Yeah.
know Chris Benstead sort of talks about that quite a lot. I think he has like a 2 hour Zoom that he does with people on how to not like everything you need to not know about the competency sort of kind of thing. And I think you can
Yeah.
easily, I think it's our job as trainers to know these inside out so that we can then simplify it for a PDI
Mm.
or an ADI coming into the industry and yeah, sort of explain it in terms that make sense. Just go and deliver it on a lesson. So on that note of on that note of us saying the competencies are useless, um,
Okay.
we'll I think we'll wrap it up there because I think we've sort of had a quite meaty chat about that competency, and like you said, it links with all the other ones as well, and particularly I think the ones within the teaching and learning strategies of
Yeah.
that style. So Andrew, did you want to tell everyone where they can find you and what you've got on offer at the moment?
Yeah. So you can find me at Let's Instruct. So it's Lydia on Demand. .co.uk. You can find me on Facebook. I get involved in quite a lot of train the trainer courses. We've got one in March and one in May. I work with ADIs and PDIs to improve their skills. And that's lots of, I do loads of things.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm always a good listener.
good. Yeah. So if you need some advice, yeah, like
Yeah.
send you a
And
message.
by the way, I'm in Northamptonshire in the Midlands. So
Yeah,
yeah.
easy to access from quite a few places.
Yeah.
Good motorway network.
Brilliant.
So before we finish, then I always ask everyone for a top tip. And so if you had one tip you could give to driving instructors, what would that be?
Teaching skills are very important, but you must keep your driving skills and knowledge of the rules of the road up to date. And you should drive in accordance to those. Because if you don't keep your driving standards up, it won't feel right when the learner is doing something wrong. So if you're straight lining around about, if you're harsh braking, yeah, and that is very important. You've got to keep those skills up.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, and I preach that myself. But I I love how you guys all come up with different stuff. It's great. And yeah, no, brilliant. That's a great way to end it. Yeah, go improve your driving skills or update them. Absolutely. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing your knowledge and time with us. So yeah, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Fantastic.
Inspire Instructor Podcast, where the learning never stops.